Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for attending. I'll call this oversight hearing to order. Today's hearing is entitled Building Tribal Economies, Modernizing Tax Policy that Work for Indian Country. The committee will examine the obstacles that federal tax policies present to tribal economic growth and infrastructure development. 2012, this committee held an oversight hearing on the same issue to hear from tribes about how federal tax policies have burdened their ability to practice the principle of tribal self-determination. It's now 5 years later. We're still looking at many of those concerns: overburdening tax policies, layers of regulations, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how the United States interacts with tribes on a government-to-government basis continue to stymie tribal economic development. Tribes and their communities face numerous other barriers to economic development, some of which we may not be able to change, such as remote locations, in some cases of tribal homelands. As our country prepares to undertake the most comprehensive tax reform effort since President Reagan was in office, this committee must work to ensure that tribes are included in that effort. In so doing, we must be aggressive in our approach to overcome the additional barriers tribes face. That's why I've introduced the S. 2012, the Tribal Economics Assistance Act of 2017, or the T Act, along with Senators Murkowski and Heitkamp as co-sponsors. I want to thank both of them. This legislation removes the regulatory obstacles that prevent tribal access to a number of tax incentives for community investments. The bill also makes permanent important tax credits that will entice private investment in tribal businesses and communities, like the Indian Employment Tax Credit and the Accelerated Depreciation Tax Credit. The Act will also facilitate infrastructure development on the reservation by providing incentives for new market tax credit project proposals that will take place in tribal communities. This bill would also encourage private tribal partnerships to fund important school construction projects in tribal communities. Finally, the bill will eliminate the burdensome government essentials function test that has limited tribes from issuing public financing tools like tax-exempt government bonds. Also, two other bills were introduced recently involving Indian tax. Senator Moran introduced S. 1935, the Tribal Tax and Investment Reform Act of 2017, and in a moment I'll turn to Senator Moran to discuss the provisions in his bill. Finally, Senator Murkowski has introduced S. 1698, the Settlement Trust Improvement Act of 2017, along with Senator Sullivan as a co-sponsor, and it will also offer her the opportunity to discuss provisions within her bill. Today I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how the proposals in these tribal tax bills, as well as others, will work to support tribes. I also want to thank my colleagues, Senator Hatch and Senator Wyden, for their work on behalf of Indian country, as many of the Indian tax provisions discussed today fall within the Finance Committee jurisdiction. Before turning to our witnesses, I want to ask the Vice Chairman Udall for his opening statement.